Hi, in this session we are going to talk about how to create a framework to test a web application. I am Dennis, Principal Software Developer at Inflectra. If during or after this session you will have any questions, please use the chat window for this workshop. Let's get started. The purpose of the framework is to make it easier to implement test cases for an application you are testing. The framework contains shared object repository and shared functions that a tester may reuse in every test case. Data files, browser profiles, web recorder configuration, test case templates, and other components. As usual, I am going to demonstrate a real-life example and show different parts of the framework using it. As an application under test, I am going to use OpenMRS Medical Record System, and I'm going to create a framework from scratch. Let's begin. First, I will create a root test for my framework. It will contain shared object repository and shared functions, OpenMRS framework. And it will be also home for all the test cases. Next step is to create local browser profiles for the framework. I will create one for Chrome. I click on the ellipsis button in the top right corner in Rapise, and this is the list of global profiles. They are not a part of the framework, they are more bound to a specific machine. So, to make a global profile, I click on Duplicate button and specify the name. Let it be Chrome. Local profile is created now, and it is now a part of the framework. Whenever I will copy my framework to some other machine, the profiles, they're here in the profiles subfolder. These profiles will be copied to that machine as well. Now I am going to create a web recorder configuration file. Right-click the test name and go to Create Web App Profile JSON. We will talk about Web App Profile in more details tomorrow in the Advanced Topic track. So far, I may tell you that it is used to generate beta-XPath locators for elements in the application under test. Next step is to create a bunch of Excel spreadsheets for my testing framework. Right-click the name of the test and choose Create Spreadsheet. The first one will be data, and it will store all the values that I will use in my test cases. The second one, returning to files, will be config spreadsheet, and it will be the place for URL and credentials to log into my system. And the last one is Dropdowns Spreadsheet. Dropdowns. And it will contain drop-down lists for RVL. We will talk about this later. Now I am moving into User.js file. I click on User in the toolbar. And this is the place for setting global variables and implementing shared functions. The first global variable that I want to define is g_record URLs, and I will set it to false. By default, it is true, and it means that Rapise will record URLs, but URLs may contain sensitive information, and also URLs are used by Rapise for automatic navigation when you are executing part of RVL. So this is not what you want in the framework. The second variable is g_browser library, and I will set it to our local profile name. This variable sets the profile to use for every test case that will be in my framework. So every test case that I will run will use the profile that I define here in User.js file. The next variable I want to set is g_command interval. And for web tests, by default, it is 1000 milliseconds, which means 1 second. And this is the delay between steps of my test. It is okay to have it 1 second when you are doing development, but later, to speed up test execution, you may want to decrease this value. Also, in User.js file, we may define test_init function that will load global object repository. To do that, I add some lines in User.js and type function test_init. And to load the global object repository, I just drag objects.js file from the files view into my User.js file. And now every test in my framework will load objects from objects.js file of the root test. Let's now create shared functions for our test framework. I will create two for login and logout. First, I need to record the steps that I need to perform to do login and logout. I click record, and Rapise connects to Chrome, and I start interacting with the application. Click on username. It is admin, and password is admin123. Then I need to select some location and click on login button. Login is successful, and the next is clicking on logout. Here we go, and I finish a recording session and insert my steps into RVL. I have the steps here, but I want them to be a part of shared functions for login and logout that I will use in my test cases. So first, these objects are now in the object repository of the root test of my framework. If we go here, objects tree, here we see them. Home and login windows contain those objects. To not interfere with objects that I will record in my test cases, I want to rename these objects to contain some common prefix. So first I want to rename the object username. I will just add capital G underscore to every object in my shared object repository. Here we go, every object is renamed now. And to create functions, I will simply copy these lines as JavaScript. And now I will return to User.js and will create my functions. So the first function will be login s, and it will have two parameters. One for username and the second one for password. And the second function that I will create will be logout. Now I will paste the steps that I copied as JavaScript in RVL here into login as function. Paste in here. Here we go. And the logout, we don't need this step here. We need it in our logout function. The last thing to do in this function is to change the hard-coded values that we have in setting for username and password to the parameters of this function. So I replace admin with username, and admin123 with password. Here we have our two shared functions that we will be able to use in our test cases. Now I am going to create one more function, login, that will read values for URL and application credentials from config file. I create a function login. Here we go. And now I navigate to my config file. Here I will create three key value pairs: URL, password, and username. And username is admin, password is admin123, and I will copy URL from my browser. Here we go. Now I need to read those values from my login function. To do that, I need to use global get property. If you don't remember how to use this function, you can always do this in RVL first. So choosing global, selecting get property, and it has optional parameters. To add them, I click on params button on the toolbar. And this get property action needs name of the property to read. So, for example, we want to read URL, and default value can be, so let it be string and an empty string. And config path is what contains the name of the file from which to read the property. In our case, it is config xlsx. Now I will simply copy this part as JavaScript and will paste it into my function. Paste. Here I will read URL. And I will do the same for reading username and password. The last part is to execute login as function with the username and password that we got from config Excel file. Also, it is nice to open the browser at the URL that we also read from config Excel file. I will use no navigator open action and will pass URL into it. So now we have a login function that reads the credentials and URL of the application from config file and performs the login after opening the browser. Next step, I will create a template test case, and it will be a base for all my future test cases. So I go to Files, right-click the name of the root test and choose Create Subtest. I will name my template TC test case template. And it should have its own set of objects. I need an ability to do recording for my test cases, and also it should read all the functions from the User.js of the root test that I already created. Click Create, and the template will be created soon. Here we go. I may open it in a separate copy of Rapise. I want to do some adjustment for this template. First, I want to add links to the spreadsheets that I created. Go into the root of my test and selecting the spreadsheets. Here we go, and now we have them here. If during development of test cases we will need to quickly reach the data file or config file, it will be very easy to do from the files view. Here we go. The next step is to go to RVL of this test and bind to the data file that we have. Here I will create a map, and it will be map of type range. I will name it data, and it will read data from data spreadsheet that we created. Let's open it. So far it has no data. Let's rename the first sheet to template, and we'll use this sheet in binding. Okay, and here I want to add some basic navigation. Let's do login before doing any steps in a test case. We have a login function for that. So as an object, I choose functions, and in the dropdowns, I should see my login function. Here it is. Also, at the end of the test, let's do logout. Functions logout. Also, before doing logout, we may want to do some cleanup after executing the steps of a test. To put cleanup steps, we recommend to create a separate sheet and call it cleanup. I will do it right now. Clicking on Add New at the top of RVL and renaming this sheet to cleanup. This sheet is supposed to contain the steps that will delete data that we create in RVL sheet. And before doing logout, let's execute this cleanup sheet. RVL do play sheet, and in the dropdown we should have cleanup now. Okay, and after logout, we may want to close the browser completely. So choosing navigator, close. All right, so now we have the template ready, and we may proceed to creation of real test cases. I close this copy of Rapise with the template, and in my root test of the framework, I will now clone this template. So the idea of the template is that you may clone it when you need to create a new test case. I am right-clicking template and choosing clone. The name of our test case will be new patient. Clicking OK, and my test case is created. I'm going to open it in another copy of Rapise as well. Here is the RVL with some steps pre-populated. Let's close the browser and test our login function. Right-click and choose Place Selection. The function should now open the browser and enter credentials. All data is read from config file. All right, login is successful. Let's return to RVL, and now we are ready to start recording. Our test case should create a new patient record in the system and then delete it. Recording is complete, and now I'm going to do a few tweaks to my test. First, I'm going to move patient deletion steps to a cleanup sheet. So I'm selecting the steps, cut, go into cleanup sheet, and then paste. The next change I want to make is rename the user label that I verify as one of the steps in my test from Jane Smith to a more generic name. So let's rename it to user label. And the last change that I want to make is I want to add an unconditional wait after pressing submit button. So we need to wait some time before we are verifying that a user was successfully added to the system. So here I will add global, do sleep, and let's wait for 3 seconds. And now it is time to make the test data-driven. First, I will put all the data values that I used during recording to the data spreadsheet. Let's open it. And I will create a new sheet for my test case. It should be new patient. And now I will put the values here. Now it is time to use data from the new patient sheet in my test. So I return to RVL, scroll to the top. This is the binding to the spreadsheet. I will just change the name of the sheet to the sheet I just created. And now I need to parameterize my step. Here is the step that enters the first name. So I change param type to data, the name of my map binding to the spreadsheet, and choose the first name here. The same I need to do for the rest of the steps in my test. Excellent! I have a test that grabs data from a spreadsheet, registers a patient, and then deletes it from the system. Now I'm going to run it. Perfect. And now I'm going to show how to use Dropdowns Excel file that we created earlier in the session. Imagine that someone created a function that is able to open a module after the login. And this function has just one parameter with name module. If in your Dropdowns Excel file, you will define a column with name module and provide the possible values. Here we are. Then Rapise will help you to create test steps when you will be using open module function. I'm going to RVL, and here I will create a new sheet. Let's name it example. And I will add 2 steps to this sheet. The first one will do the login, and the second one will open the module that I want. So let's see what we have here in the dropdown for param value. This is my list from the Dropdowns Excel file. So I will select register patient and will run these 2 steps. Place selection, and Rapise should open the browser, do the login, and then select register patient module. Here we are. It works perfectly. When the framework is ready, it is time to put it into SpiraTest. Here is my instance, and here I have 2 test cases created. One of them should be linked to the root of the framework, and others should be linked with real tests. I am going to do this right now. This is my root test, and here I will click Save to Spira button on the toolbar. This is my product in Spira, and in this list I see all the test cases. I will choose this one that is intended to be linked with the framework root and click Save Synchronize button. Rapise will create a repository in Spira and will upload all the files into Spira. So this is the first part. The next part, I will close this instance of Rapise. The next part is to link the real test with the test case in Spira. I again click Save to Spira, And I will choose new patient test case this time. Clicking Save Synchronize and clicking OK. Here we are. Everything is inside Spira now, and my tests are linked with SpiraTest cases. I will close this instance of Rapise as well. In Spira, I will go to Test Sets, and in the Test Sets list, I have one test set that I created. This test set contains just one test case that we implemented during this session. Let's scroll down. Here it is, new patient. Now it is time to schedule this test set for execution. I will select the host that I am showing you right now, nightly, and also I will set the planned date for execution. So let it be yesterday to make this test set overdue. All right. So I'm clicking Save here and minimizing the browser. Let me close Chrome as well. On this machine, I'm running Rapise Launcher. That is querying for Spira jobs on a regular basis, and very soon it should see that it needs to execute a test. If we don't want to wait a time, we can do a force poll, and then the test will be executed. And when the execution is complete, all the results will be uploaded to Spira. Let's open Spira and refresh the test runs. Here is our test run. It's all green. The execution was successful. Excellent. That's it. You may find a bunch of framework examples on our GitHub channel. Just go to github.com/Inflectra and search for framework. And here you go. We have frameworks for Dynamics, for Salesforce, and some general purpose framework examples. Thanks for watching. I'm Dennis from Team Rapise at Inflectra. Thank you for joining me today.